we all live two lives. Only the most intimate people that we know really know who we are.
911, do you need police or paramedics?
Paramedics.
It begins with a 911 call from the house.
It was a Sunday morning, November 13th, year 2016.
What's the address of the emergency, sir?
It's Talega in San Clemente.
Talega is a new community. It's kind of considered a sleepy little town. Nice place to work, nice place to live.
And what's happened?
We got a patient here who's fallen off stairs, and I don't have a pulse, and she's cold.
Eric Scott Sills is a fertility doctor.
So you found her down at the bottom of the stairs?
Yeah, partially on the stairs.
Susann Sills is his wife,
Looks like her shoe come off or something.
the mother of twins, a boy and a girl.
So she's not breathing?
No, she's not breathing.
She was the one who was found that morning.
I'm going to give you instructions for chest compressions, okay?
They had it on a speakerphone, so Scott and Mary Kate, the daughter, were both heard on the 911 call.
What are you trying to do, sir? I can't see what's going on. What are you
No,
doing?
CPR. I'm doing the CPR.
Dr. Sills was an infertility specialist.
Keep going. Okay, I'm going just this way.
They ran their clinic as partners.
Susann took care of all the business side of things.
Continue the compressions until paramedics arrive and take over.
She's making noises out of her mouth.
She was his #1 supporter in everything that he did. They really looked like they had it all.
Okay, hold on. We're doing it. Baby, come on.
She was making some kind of noise just from the compressions, but I think she was already dead.
We get notified by our sergeant to come out to a house and begin a death investigation.
So when you went inside, what stuck out to you?
Well, as soon as you go into the front door, the stairwell is right off to your left. Susann was right there. She had a blanket covering her body.
We could see the other things laying around, like this stainless steel soup pot, a purse, an empty medication bottle.
And then the scarf was a little bit further down away from her. The deputy coroner, during her preliminary body exam of Susann, the injuries weren't consistent with somebody falling down the stairs.
Her neck had a pretty pronounced ligature mark.
The question is, how was she strangled?
When she was found,
The scarf was around her neck.
I think the first day there was mention of dogs maybe pulling on a scarf.
Oh, you're so good.
They had a couple of dogs, rescues. Mary Kate saw the dogs pulling on the scarf.
We didn't get the impression that it was any kind of violent pulling.
Do you think that the dogs could have pulled on her scarf hard enough to strangle her to death?
Could they do it? Yes.
When you came to the house, it was a death investigation. By the time you left, was it a murder investigation?
No, it wasn't just as clear-cut as that.
Do you have a spidey sense when you go into these scenes?
I'd like to think so. Probably all of us would like to think so, that we could just figure it out as soon as we walk in, Sherlock Holmes style.
On that Sunday morning in November 2016, Orange County Sheriff's homicide detectives Eric Hatch and Dave Holloway had more questions than clues.
At that point in time, that morning, November 13th, was Scott Sills a victim or a suspect?
To us, he was a victim. We were going to a house where 2 kids and a husband just lost their wife and mother.
Dr. Scott Sills had made that 911 call and reported finding his wife and business partner, Susann, at the bottom of the stairs.
Is it a steep stairway?
Yeah, it's pretty high. I believe it was 13.5 feet from the floor to the top of the stairs.
Did it seem plausible that a 45-year-old woman in pretty good shape would have fallen down the stairs to her death?
At the time, it sounded believable.
Susann had injuries to pretty much her whole body. Her face was all bruised up, her back was bruised up, both arms and legs had bruising and abrasions.
And around her body was that odd collection of items.
They definitely stood out, especially that steel pot. It almost looked like it was placed there. It wasn't upside down or leaning against anything.
We had to figure out why those things were there.
The detectives say Dr. Sills didn't seem nervous that a homicide team was in his home asking questions.
He was just kind of going with the flow.
How cooperative was he?
Oh, very. Everything we asked of him, he gave us.
He signed a consent form that gave us permission to search his house.
And when they interviewed the Sills children, Mary Catherine and Eric, the 12-year-old twins, each told a similar story to their dad, that Susann had not been feeling well that night.
Susann had a history of migraines. They were typically debilitating, requiring a dark room, quiet, and bed rest, and she had been suffering from a migraine that weekend.
The migraine seemed to explain that large pot.
Sometimes she carried around a bowl in order to have it near her bedside in case she threw up in the middle of the night.
And the empty pill bottle was for a pain medication Dr. Sills said his wife took to treat her migraines.
So did that make it sound more possible that she could have fallen down the stairs because she was suffering from a migraine?
Maybe.
And there seemed to be nothing in the couple's relationship to suggest another reason.
What did you learn about the Sills marriage?
According to Scott, everything was fine. They had a good relationship.
Both children attested that their parents loved each other and said they rarely argued and were never violent. Detectives started piecing together a timeline of the weekend.
Saturday night, she was on the couch. Eric came down to see her, check on her, make sure she was okay.
It was around midnight when Eric said he and his mom went back upstairs after she put the dogs away in their crate. Mary Catherine had gone to bed in her parents' bedroom. Susann was going to spend the night in Mary Catherine's room, which was the quietest.
It was Mary Catherine's idea for Susann to spend the night in that room. It was clean, according to Mary Catherine, and done up like a little hotel suite for Susann to convalesce in there.
Mary Catherine had left a note on her door with what would be her last words to her mom. "I know you are tired," she said, "but you need to know that I love you." Around 4 a.m., Eric said he woke to the sound of his parents arguing in the next room.
The two windows, that's Eric's room.
So Eric is right next to Mary Catherine's room where his mom was.
Yeah.
And what did he tell you he heard?
Well, he heard loud voices arguing, but he didn't describe hearing any physical confrontation.
Eric told detectives that after about 5 minutes, he decided to go sleep in the main bedroom with his sister. According to Mary Catherine's statement, she thought he'd come in around 3:40 a.m. and told her their parents were arguing about a work email.
How do you know she got an email?
Because Eric said they were talking about that.
Oh, okay. So Eric told you that she got an email and that it was about something
about work.
Dr. Sills told detectives he had argued with Susann because he found her working late on her laptop, which made her migraines worse.
When you heard that they had an argument shortly before she was found at the bottom of the stairs dead, what was going through your mind?
Well, again, that's one more piece of data that we're going to collect. It doesn't mean one way or the other that it was a murder, but that's definitely an avenue that we would have to pursue.
Neither Eric nor Mary Catherine heard their dad return to the bedroom.
I woke up and my dad was just on the covers, just laying there. There wasn't enough room to get in, I guess.
Yeah.
So he just was laying there.
on top of it.
Yeah.
It was around 6:30 a.m. the next morning when Dr. Sills and the twins woke up. He asked them if they wanted to go to the pool and get some donuts. Mary Catherine said when she left the bedroom and looked over the banister, she saw her mom's body at the bottom of the stairs, that long red and white scarf around her neck.
That was Mary Catherine's scarf. It was found in the same room as Susann's body.
But the scarf wasn't on her body.
When we arrived, it was not. Mary Catherine told us that she had to remove the scarf, and she did that not to impede Mom's breathing.
Adding to the mystery were the injuries to Susann's neck the deputy coroner had noticed during a preliminary examination of the body earlier that morning.
Especially with the ligature mark across her neck, it just didn't make sense.
Is it possible that she could have fallen down the stairs and then somehow the scarf strangled her?
Could have caught on a banister? Sure, I suppose so, but we didn't have any evidence of that.
As detectives continued their investigation, the questions mounted.
Did anybody in the house hear a fall down the stairs?
No, nobody described hearing a fall down the stairs, or if Susann had been carrying that stainless steel pot, no one heard that bounce down the stairs or land on the tile floor. There was no evidence on the stairs of someone going down, like broken ballast or anything like that.
And something else the detectives thought was strange.
It was a warm day, even though it was November. But when we spoke with Scott, and during the whole time we were in the house doing our investigation, he was wearing a beanie over his head. And he said that he slept with it because it was cold.
Did you ask him to remove the beanie?
Yes.
As it turned out, Susann wasn't the only one with injuries that morning.
We discovered that Scott had some injuries. He had a cut up here on his forehead, and on his arm he had a bruise.
Dr. Scott Sills said there was a simple explanation for the injuries. He had hurt himself while working on his car in the garage with his son Eric. There was just one problem.
Eric told us Dad didn't hurt himself.
Did he say to you, I left the garage, so maybe he hurt himself while I was gone?
No, he told us they came in the house together.
And investigators said they found something Dr. Sills couldn't explain on that day.
You found blood.
Yes.
Blood in Mary Catherine's room, where Susann had been staying, on the curtains, the wall, and the nightstand.
So that morning, when you asked Scott about the blood, what did he say?
He didn't know where it came from. He was unaware of it.
Mary Catherine told investigators the room was, quote, perfect when she left it. She also said she'd turned down the bed, but now it was made.
It didn't really make sense. Why would Susann take the time to make the bed in the middle of the night?
So if you found blood in Mary Catherine's bedroom, you know that there are ligature marks on Susann. Why not take him down to the station at this point and question him?
Once you arrest somebody, that starts processes that you can't stop. Besides the blood in the bedroom, we didn't really have enough evidence of a fight occurring. So at the end of the day, there wasn't enough probable cause legally to arrest him.
Susann's autopsy 4 days later didn't provide any definitive answers. The forensic pathologist noted that Susann had injuries all over her body that could have resulted from a fall, including a fractured C3 vertebra near the base of her neck, which can be fatal. Then there was that ligature mark across her neck and hemorrhaging of the blood vessels in her eyes, which pointed to strangulation. It would take months to make an official ruling.
It's not something they want to rush into. It's not something they want to make a rash judgment on. The doctor wanted to examine the whole case more clearly.
In the meantime, detectives requested DNA testing on evidence collected from the Sills home and forensic analysis on Susann's phone and laptop. They also dug deeper into who the Sills were.
None of their immediate neighbors knew anything about the family. Eventually, we contacted whoever we could out of their contact list to try and find out more.
In high school, I thought, this must be what genius means. His humor, his quick wit.
Sandy Roberts and Jamie Akins have known Scott Sills since their high school days in Harriman, Tennessee.
He was something we had never seen before. In a small town in Tennessee at that age, he was very special.
It was hilarious. How many people come to class in a three-piece suit, and it's not dress-up day?
He's flamboyant, he's bigger than life. He was very, very kind.
I grew up pretty poor. I didn't have a car in high school or anything like that, and a lot of times no lunch money, and he always pulled out his wallet and paid for it. It just wasn't a question.
His future seemed limitless. He was accepted to both law school and medical school.
We were kind of all on the edge of our seat, wondering what he was going to decide to do.
And it was no surprise when the hometown boy became a renowned IVF specialist, a profession that would lead him to Susann.
Susann was going through fertility treatment, trying to get pregnant with her first husband.
Chris Solimini met Susann Arsuaga in business school, where she earned an MBA. She had confided in him about her struggles to get pregnant.
Having kids was everything to Susann. She'd cry about it. I mean, it was so important to her. And Eric Scott Sills was her fertility doctor.
But soon, Chris says, they were a couple.
She started talking about Dr. Sills after she had told me she was getting divorced and that she was now dating him. I just remember her saying he's a brilliant doctor.
Dr. Sills, who was also coming out of a previous marriage, seemed to have met his match.
Susann was smart, witty.
We love Mr. Stock!
Sarcastic, but not in a mean way, you know, just enough to dig at you. You know, incredibly driven, a loyal friend.
She was so classy, so beautiful, very engaging.
Seemed like to me he found one that it was a good fit.
Susann fit right in at Scott's 20th high school reunion.
She danced the whole time. They were lovely together. He just seemed really happy.
The couple married and welcomed twins through IVF, adding to Dr. Sills' two older kids. And eventually, Susann's business acumen would lead them to start their own IVF practice in April 2015.
She started the business and she built it. Susann pretty much ran everything with the exception of actually doing the procedures.
The practice soon took off.
We actually have Dr. Scott Sills here, an OBGYN who's also a fertility specialist.
And Dr. Sills was often featured on the TV program The Doctors, which was distributed by CBS.
We've decided to provide you that removal surgery at no cost.
He was, in many eyes, a saint. He was loved by his patients.
Dr. Julio Novoa is an OBGYN who co-authored a book with Dr. Sills.
Dr. Sills was a great doctor, and Susann was a great advocate for women as well. And they were a team, not just married, but a team, and working well together.
But about a month before her death, Rick Leeds, another of Susann's friends, says she left him a troubling message.
She sounded like she was whispering. It was so different from the happy, jovial, excited voicemails I got before. This one was definitely, things weren't good.
When they spoke, Rick says it sounded like there was tension over a photo.
She said it was a topless photo of her that had appeared on a blog. This was some discussion she didn't want to have.
When news of Susann's death reached her friends, they were stunned.
It was devastating.
I couldn't believe it. It didn't seem plausible to me that she just fell down the stairs with a migraine headache.
It didn't sound like the vibrant Susann they knew. Dr. Sills' friends say they were equally perplexed.
Scott would not discuss anything with us.
He quickly changed the subject. We never spoke again. You don't know how tragedies affect people.
What were your impressions of Scott Sills throughout the investigation?
I would describe him as emotionless. He never acted as though Susann was even his wife. He talked about what a good manager she was and how she kept their business flowing, but he never once mentioned that she was a good mother or that he loved her.
All very businesslike.
Yeah.
In fact, the day after Suzann's death, the doctor had gone to work.
I was shocked. Who goes to the office the next morning when your wife died?
Joni Ricker's daughter was a nurse at the Sills IVF clinic and had called her in a panic.
She said her patients are on cycle and they have to be treated.
Joni volunteered to help manage the office, something Susann did, and ended up working there for 2 years.
Did Dr. Sills talk about his wife?
Oh, never.
Did he ever say how she died?
Oh, it was never discussed.
Pretty soon, she says, the doctor started changing his appearance.
He started to dress like a movie star. I mean, he was very simple before.
And she says the once balding doctor now had a full head of hair.
We definitely noticed new hair.
They also noticed Dr. Sills' flashier online persona.
I said to one of my friends, now is Sills a doctor or a model? I personally don't know any doctors on social media that are taking selfies in the gym and their blazers and their sunglasses and their Porsches. I mean, it was a little much.
All of a sudden, there started to be another woman in photos, and he was out on dates, and they were going around town.
The behavior raised eyebrows, but it was hardly evidence. Then, in November 2017, a year after Suzann's death, there was finally news from the coroner's office. Suzann's cause of death was cited as ligature strangulation, and the manner, a homicide. Dr. Sills was now the prime suspect. DNA results on the blood in Mary Catherine's room showed a mixture of his and Suzann's DNA.
They were both there.
There was a fight.
There's a fight, and he killed his wife.
On August 8, 2018, nearly 2 years after Suzann's death, Detectives Holloway and Hatch made a surprise house call at the doctor's home.
Did you ask Dr. Sills at this point, just flat out, did you kill your wife?
Yes, then started stressing out and started sweating, and he became more defensive.
They say the doctor denied killing his wife, and he now offered an explanation for his blood in Mary Catherine's room. He said he had injured himself replacing a window screen.
Wouldn't Mary Catherine have seen the blood that he left from replacing the screen?
For sure.
And she didn't mention it?
Nope.
Despite the death being ruled a homicide, detectives said they still had more investigating to do, like finding a motive. A search of Suzann's phone provided some clues. Text messages hinted at problems in the marriage.
There was one in particular where she had some pretty strong words towards Scott.
In text sent in late August, less than 3 months before her death, Susann wrote, "I am trapped. You are killing me. I just want out. And we just aren't right for each other." And about a month before her death, Susann had confided in Rick Leeds.
She and Scott were in a really rocky place, and she was thinking about leaving him.
He said Susann was also upset about a photo she'd posted online.
Whatever was going on between her and Scott, and this picture was just a pivotal point for her.
Susann had posted a topless photo after making a bet in a political chat room called Patrick.net.
Susann apparently was one of the few women who was involved in this forum. She kind of threw out that if Donald Trump won the presidential nomination, that she would post a picture of her bare breasts.
And on the day of her death, detectives had found a printout in Dr. Sills' home office of an exchange between Susann and another Patrick.net member from August 30th, 2016, discussing the photo. The man, who went by 10-Pound Bass, wrote, "All I've got to say is you must have a super cool husband." Susann, aka Turtle Dove, replied, "He's exhausted, actually. It isn't easy being married to a woman who is partially naked and posing alluringly all the time." Dr. Sills denied that he had printed that chat, but when investigators later searched his phone, they found a photo of the same exchange.
Does this sound like this could lead to motive?
Yes. If it's something that's building up in him, some kind of anger or jealousy about what his wife's doing online without him.
Enough to kill her.
Mm-hmm.
Detectives also learned that Dr. Sills had tried to collect on a $250,000 life insurance policy on Susann, but he claimed the insurance company had called him.
He wasn't able to collect because that death certificate was ruled as a homicide.
Do you think Scott Sills thought he'd gotten away with it?
I think so.
Every day that went by, he felt a little bit more at ease, I think.
On April 25, 2019, nearly 2.5 years after Susann's death, Dr. Sills was arrested for her alleged murder on his way to surgery. He quickly posted a $1 million bond, but investigators were about to get an unexpected tip from a woman who said she had met Dr. Sills while Susann was still alive.
They met through Facebook. He was infatuated with her.
She shared an email Dr. Sills had sent her about 2 weeks after Susann's death.
Pour ma chère Marie.
Yes.
So it's in French. This is probably the most important manuscript I have ever written. I am asking you to seriously rethink our suspended but once intense relationship. When you first read that email, what was your reaction?
I was shocked. This is a motive.
So could Dr. Sills have killed his wife to get her out of the way?
Oh, I just don't see that at all.
Dr. Sills' defense attorney, Jack Early, denies that there was a romantic relationship. And he says that email was merely a devastated father's desperate attempt to find a new mother for his children.
Did you feel in your gut that you could win this case?
Oh, yes.
In November 2023, just over 7 years after Susann Sills' death, Scott Sills, now stripped of his medical license, went on trial for her murder. The Orange County District Attorney's Office declined our request for an interview, but cameras were allowed in court for portions of the trial, where Senior Deputy DA Jennifer Walker laid out her case to the jury.
November 13th of 2016, this man killed his wife and hid it.
Walker argued that Scott Sills beat and then strangled Susann to death before staging the scene to make it look like she'd fallen down the stairs.
This is a murder, not an accident.
The prosecution's case relied heavily on Susann's autopsy, but Scott Sills' defense attorney, Jack Early, came to court armed with a unique theory. He suggested that Susann fell, either going up or down the stairs, and that one or both of the family dogs then tugged on the scarf that was wrapped around her neck.
Do you honestly think that the dogs pulled hard enough to strangle her to death?
No, I didn't. That was not the main theory, that the dogs actually strangled her to death.
Instead, Early focused on another injury identified in Susann's autopsy, that fractured C3 vertebra. He says that injury is consistent with a fall and that it would have left Susann incapacitated.
Let's assume that someone trips and falls and fractures their C3. Their breathing is compromised. If they're then choked, it doesn't take much to kill them.
The defense had the scarf tested for dog DNA. It came back positive. And there was testimony that the dogs were known to play tug-of-war, as seen in this video. And when Susann and Scott's now 19-year-old daughter, Mary Catherine, took the stand for the prosecution, her testimony supported the defense's theory. Investigator Dave Holloway was at the trial.
Mary Catherine testified that she saw the dogs pulling at the scarf around her neck, and none of that came up during the day we interviewed her the first time.
How did that strike you?
Well, I know that she was still close with her father.
Do you think she's trying to protect her dad?
I would say so.
Early denies that. He says the reason Mary Catherine didn't tell investigators is simple.
It wasn't asked. Why would she think the dogs are important? She doesn't even know that there's any question of being choked.
He says Scott Sills did tell first responders, and he argued that Susann's toxicology tests point to an accidental fall. She had a muscle relaxant and pain medication in her system. And Early told the jury that Susann suffered from a fainting disorder and that vertigo would accompany her migraines. But the prosecution said the defense's theory just doesn't make sense.
Strangulation is a silent killer. You know what's not a silent killer? Falling down multiple stairs. You have to believe she bounced her head, neck, back, shoulders, inside her arms, legs, and feet, multiple ways against approximately 6 stairs, like being in a soundproof pinball machine. Then was strangled by her dogs. Not reasonable.
And why would Susann have a scarf around her neck that early in the morning to begin with? Prosecutors suggested that Scott Sills used it to strangle her and then left it around her neck to cover the marks. But Early told the jury it wasn't unusual for Susann to wear a scarf, especially when she wasn't feeling well.
Because if she got sick, that was something that she would wear a scarf to wipe your mouth with it.
But the prosecution also pointed out that Susann and Scott's son, Eric, told investigators he saw his mother put the dogs away in their crate in the hours before she died.
Eric said that his mom put the dogs in the crate.
Yes. Sometimes dogs, when they're crate trained, when they go to bed, will go lay in the crate, even with the door open.
There was also no blood on the stairs or damage to them.
There are all these injuries that you say come from the fall down the stairs all over her body, but she leaves no marks on the stairs.
But there's no marks anywhere in the house.
But there was that blood in Mary Catherine's bedroom, and the prosecution argued it was evidence that a fight occurred. A forensic scientist testified that the stains on the nightstand and drapes were consistent with Scott Sills' DNA. Early did acknowledge that his client's blood was in the room, but he told the jury about Scott's claim that he hurt himself there on an earlier date.
From Scott replacing a screen?
Yeah, from getting cut on a nail that was on the back of the nightstand that was there.
That forensic scientist, though, testified that one of the stains on the wall was a mixture of DNA, and Scott and Susann were likely contributors. Early says that doesn't mean it was Susann's blood, and that it could have been her touch DNA that was picked up.
Susann had touched that area before at some point in time, and she lived there.
But the prosecution pointed out that there were also clumps of Susann's hair found in Mary Catherine's room. And there were blood stains on Susann's clothing that were found to be consistent with Scott Sills' DNA, too. Early had a rebuttal to it all, starting with the hair.
She has hair extensions. And you know what hair extensions cause? Loss of hair.
And the blood on the clothes?
You don't know how old it is.
The jury was also shown pictures of those injuries that were observed on Scott. Remember how he told investigators that he hurt himself while working on his car with his son? And how, according to investigators, Eric said that his father didn't get injured? Well, when Eric took the stand, his testimony allowed for the possibility.
What he testified is, well, I didn't stay there the whole time he fixed the car.
Does that seem like a discrepancy to you?
Well, it's not a discrepancy. Nobody's asking him that full story at the age of 12.
So he didn't necessarily say at age 12, Dad didn't get the injury from the car.
No, he basically said, I wasn't there when he got the injury.
While Eric Sills did testify that a loud discussion between his parents had woken him up shortly before his mother's death, the defense told the jury that there was nothing to it. And those texts between Scott and Susann in the months before Susann's death?
If you have 40,000 texts and there's 5 of them with hard language in it, that's a perfect marriage.
The jury didn't hear about the life insurance policy, that email Scott sent to another woman, or his social media photos in the wake of his wife's death. But they were told about the Patrick.net posts, and the prosecution argued that topless photo that Susann posted on the site enraged Scott.
It wasn't a big deal.
It's not striking to you that he had this photo in 2 places, on his phone and then on the printer?
No, first of all, I don't know really who printed this stuff up.
Early maintains there is no motive for murder.
There was never any physical violence. Their working and marriage relationship, everybody looked at it as loving.
Scott Sills chose not to take the stand. The trial spanned 3 weeks, and then the case went to the jury.
My heart was just pounding.
What do you make of the defense that the dogs may have played a role in her death? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
Jurors Aaron Ellis, Jack Van Camp, and Susan Blejo say that when deliberations began, they felt the pressure.
It's just so intimidating that you got someone's life on the line.
It weighs on you.
Oh, yeah. And the ripple effect.
The kids and the...
Yeah.
Did you think about that? That these kids didn't only lose their mom, that if you convict him, now they're losing their dad?
Of course.
Yeah.
They say they also felt a clear motive was lacking.
I mean, it's hard to imagine why something like this
Somebody would do that.
Yeah.
After about 3 hours, they came to a decision.
The jurors have indicated that they've reached a verdict in this matter.
The clerk read the verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Eric Scott Sills, not guilty of the crime of first-degree murder. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Eric Scott Sills, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder.
Guilty of second-degree murder. Scott Sills, who gave the gift of life to so many through his IVF practice, now convicted of taking the life of his wife, the mother of his kids.
I just felt sad. I mean, I was tearing up on the way out. This whole family had been through so much, you know. Now this is the next phase of it.
But he did that.
The jurors we spoke to say that no one on the jury bought the defense's theory about the dogs.
The dogs would have to choke her on the stairs, and my dog was as big as hers. And my dog cannot get a grip on wooden stairs with their nails to do anything. They just slide.
The scarf had no puncture wounds either. I would have expected holes.
And the fall down the stairs wouldn't create that scenario on her body.
Instead, what they spent the most time grappling with was whether Scott Sills was guilty of first-degree or second-degree murder. First-degree murder requires premeditation and deliberation.
I just didn't think he planned it.
I don't.
And if he had planned it or done any kind of forethought, it wouldn't be a hot mess crime scene that it was.
It was kind of like a snap.
But investigator Dave Holloway says while Scott Sills may not have planned his crime, he certainly had the time to think about what he was doing.
He had plenty of time from when he applied pressure to Susann's neck till she died to stop what he was doing. He still did it. I was a little disappointed that it was a second degree.
On March 15, 2024, about 3 months after the verdict, court reconvened for sentencing. Susann Sills' mother, Teresa Neubauer, addressed the court and kept the focus on her daughter.
She was a dynamic person. She had hopes and dreams.
Hopes and dreams, Neubauer said, that one day Susann would see her daughter, Mary Catherine, walk down the stairs of the family's San Clemente home on her wedding day.
It was a very painful thing for me to learn of the role the staircase eventually played in real life.
Mary Catherine also addressed the court and spoke of all the loss she had endured at such a young age. She and her brother were taken in by a family friend after their father's arrest, and that family friend died suddenly of a health condition around the end of the trial. She asked the judge to show her father mercy.
I want my father to walk me down the aisle at my wedding someday. When I have a family and children, I want my father to be there to hold my baby. I have been left orphaned, and I feel so lost without my parents.
We're here for sentencing on the matter.
Judge Patrick Donahue sentenced Scott Sills to the mandatory sentence under California law, 15 years to life in prison.
Good luck, sir.
His fate was decided, but for so many, questions remain. Exactly what led up to Susann Sills' death?
Do you think we'll ever know exactly how it happened?
I don't think so.
No.
Scott Sills declined our request for an interview, but in the end, no explanation will suffice or ease the profound sense of loss that lingers. Patients now without their doctor.
Thousands of women felt him to be a saint, from the saint all the way down to the devil. That's how it ended up being.
And children without their father or their mother.
Her kids were so important to her, and everything she did revolved around her children. She was an incredible human being. You know, I miss her.
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Post-mortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Postmortem. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Green, and today we're talking about the case of Susann Sills, who was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in her Orange County, California home. Now, her husband, a renowned fertility doctor, claims that she fell and her death was an accident. But later, he's charged with her murder. So joining me now to discuss the final episode of this season are 48 Hours correspondent Tracy Smith and producer Gayane Keshishyan Mendez. Tracy, Gayane, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Before we dive in, a quick reminder for our listeners to go first and watch or listen to this episode. The title is The Puzzling Death of Susann Sills. You can find the full audio just below this episode in your podcast feed. So go listen if you haven't already, and then come join us for our conversation. All right, here we go. So there's something really unusual about this case. It's that Susann's husband is a doctor. And you would imagine that if you're going to have an accident at home and fall down your stairs, this is the best case scenario. The doctor is already there. So we heard some portions of the 911 call that he made on that morning, Sunday, November 13th, 2016. We want to play some of it because there are a few points that really jumped out at me right away.
Okay, and what's happened?
We got a patient here who's fallen off stairs, and I don't have a pulse, and she's cold, and I don't know what time this happened.
Oh, okay, so she's not breathing?
No, she's not breathing.
She's not breathing. Okay, sir, I've got help being sent while we're talking. Is there anybody else there with you?
Oh, yes, our whole family's here.
Okay, let's get her down on a hard, flat surface on her back.
Okay.
We're going to give you instructions while paramedics are
I'm going
driving
to put you on
there.
speakerphone. Hang on a minute.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can still hear you, sir. So you found her down at the bottom of the stairs?
Yeah, partially on the stairs.
Okay.
Looks like her shoe come off or something. So you want me to put her on her back?
Right, on her back, flat on her back.
Why is he acting like he doesn't know CPR? He's a doctor.
That's a really good point. And it's something that was debated at the trial. The 911 call was actually played several times, both by the prosecution and the defense. And when the prosecution played it, she really dissected it from the perspective of, look at all these things that sound different than what you would expect a person who's just found his wife dead and trying to save her life would do. She argues that he's putting off giving her CPR, that he actually waits for the 911 operator to give him instructions on doing CPR. And he's kind of fiddling around trying to find something called a pulse oximeter, which measures if you're breathing, if you have a heartbeat. And so he waits about 5 minutes before he actually starts administering the CPR. And, I think we all know that it's key to start doing CPR right away. The prosecution said that this 911 call is really just a setup for him to tell his story for the first time. And he knows that she's dead. There's nothing he can do. So he's just sort of biding his time and going through the motions.
But then he also calls her the patient.
So Jack Early, the defense attorney for Dr. Sills, says, yes, he calls her the patient, but he's in doctor mode. So he is maybe detaching himself a little bit, but that's because he's gone into doctor mode now. He's getting the pulse ox because the 911 operator asked if she was alive. So that's his thought is, I can get the pulse ox to find out if she's alive. This is what Jack Early is telling us. He also was saying he's not doing CPR every day in his IVF practice. So, of course, he's maybe a little rusty on CPR. And he also argues that Mary Catherine, the daughter, is sitting there. Would Mary Catherine be in on this conspiracy? This is what Jack Early's asking me, that she would see her father not doing CPR and not say something?
Okay, those are all really, really interesting points that I had not considered. So a year after Susann's death, the coroner's office finally cited her cause of death as ligature strangulation and the manner a homicide. Out of curiosity, why did it take a year to come to a conclusion? Or is that a standard length of time?
It's something that that was brought up at trial and something that Jack Early, the defense attorney, kind of went after, the fact that it took a year to get this ruling for the cause of death, and made the case that the forensic pathologist was essentially on the prosecution's team, working with the investigators rather than being sort of an objective scientific mind looking at the case. And when the forensic pathologist who did the autopsy was on the stand, the defense attorney tried to say that she kind of arbitrarily picked the cause of death and waited until there was more from the investigation so that she could figure out which one fit best and chose that conclusion. So, but the investigators say, look, she just wanted to be careful. She wanted to look at all the facts. And the forensic pathologist does look at evidence in the case. They're not looking at just the body. So in this case, she saw early on that there was a C3 fracture and the ligature mark, and she indicated all of the injuries, on a diagram right away, but she didn't draw her conclusions until she actually saw some crime scene photos and found out about the blood in the room.
At a trial in November of 2023, the defense made the argument that the ligature marks could have been made by Sills' two dogs pulling at the scarf around Susann's neck after she'd already fallen down the stairs. How did that argument stand up at trial? I know they showed pictures of the dogs playing tug of war. I don't know if you guys are pet people. I think anyone who has had a dog knows they play tug of war. But I don't know with your scarf around your neck.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, Anne-Marie. The forensic pathologist testified at trial that the ligature mark required a sustained, even pull on both sides. And the jurors discussed this when they went into deliberations. The dogs would have had to be pulling evenly at the same time. And the other thing that the jurors brought up is that if she was on this wooden staircase, how could the dogs with their nails even get a grip to be able to pull on the scarf? So yeah, it would have to be a very coordinated effort by the dogs, according to how the jurors looked at this. Yeah.
There was also the fact that, there was no damage on the stairs from Susann falling. You would think that there would be some scuffs, something. How did the defense explain that?
He didn't necessarily try to explain it. I think he was more trying to poke holes in the prosecution's theory, and he countered it with, well, you don't see marks anywhere else in the house. Like the prosecution's arguing there's this big fight to the death in the bedroom and that he placed her at the bottom of the stairs. But he's saying, if that's true, where's the evidence of that? Why isn't there more blood? Why isn't there blood all over the floor, damage to the furniture. He's saying there are no marks anywhere if you're going to make the argument that there are no marks on the stairs. So that was more his strategy, was to kind of give you the argument for the reverse.
And then, Tracy, when you spoke to Jack early, he sort of gave a little more insight into what he thought happened.
He kind of had two theories, and let me just explain this. It was tough to get the full story out of Jack early because he says he can't tell it because it's Dr. Sills' story. Dr. Sills didn't testify, so he basically said we didn't get the whole story at trial. There's more to tell, and Scott Sills has to tell it. Now, having said that, what he said to us was, maybe she was killed by the C3 fracture, so the fracture to her neck, which would have happened from a fall down the stairs. Or maybe she was incapacitated enough from this C3 fracture that then she's at the bottom of the stairs and the dogs pull on the scarf enough to leave the mark, not necessarily to kill her. He also theorized that maybe it was one dog because the scarf was tied around her neck, and then you wouldn't have to have the coordination of the two dogs. Then you just have the one dog pulling on the tied scarf, and it could have made that even mark. This was his theory.
Did they present any of that at trial?
I mean, yes, he did. He even went so far as to test the scarf for dog DNA, and it came back positive with dog DNA, cat DNA, and pig DNA, which they explained as the dogs were eating pig ears as snacks, and so that would leave pig DNA on the scarf. But yeah, I mean, he went with the dog theory, yes.
So he was sort of asking the jury to disregard the coroner's report and to find a different cause of death.
Yes, he poked holes in the ruling that it was ligature strangulation that was the cause of death, yes.
All right, so let us talk about the motive, because it seems like the prosecution really didn't have a clear explanation for why Dr. Sills would want to murder his wife.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they said that they didn't need to prove motive, but they gave a lot of options, right, Gayane?
Yeah, I mean, some of this we went into in our hour, but there were some angry texts that Susann had sent within 3 months of her death. There were finances that were kind of tight because they had started this business. And so they had to put kind of everything into it while it got off the ground. And another issue that we heard not only in trial, but also from one of the friends of Susann that we interviewed was that Susann felt really disrespected by Scott's older children at times, his son, and she was upset that, her husband really didn't stick up for her. So that was something that the prosecutor also mentioned at trial, that in these text messages was one of the things that she was mad at him about.
I think the texts are really interesting because, in talking to Jack early, he basically said, if you pull out these things that we pulled out, like I just won out and you're killing me. Yes, they sound very damning, but these are all related to work. This couple worked together, that it's that working relationship that caused all of the tension, and you shouldn't read so much into it. You know what? I work with my spouse. I kind of get that argument. It can get tense, and it doesn't mean it's not a reflection on the whole marriage. It's just in that working situation.
And then, of course, there are those Patrick.net posts and the photo that was posted of Susann topless.
Let us talk about this, because I found the whole thing just really odd. But let's just start with, because I'd never heard of Patrick.net. Can you just sort of explain what Patrick.net is?
So it's basically this political chat room that's frequented by conservatives, kind of like Twitter or Reddit, but they say much more freedom of speech than either Twitter or Reddit.
Patrick actually testified.
Patrick from Patrick.net?
Yes. He was a witness, and he said that there were about 13,000 members. A few hundred of them were active. So kind of a small online community, but Susann seemed pretty active, and they were really friendly exchanges. She seemed to feel really comfortable talking about her political views. She even shared some personal photos of herself, her family, her pets. It was kind of like her little space, and she seemed comfortable expressing herself.
Is this something that she argued with her husband about, her participation on this site?
When Patrick testified, he said that someone claiming to be Dr. Sills emailed him after Susann's death. He was being asked to remove Susann's information off of Patrick.net. And he said that that made him really uncomfortable and he felt like it would be destroying evidence. He said he left everything as is pertaining to Susann. And when Dr. Sills was arrested, one of the users actually posted something like, why do I have a feeling this is going to end up on 48 Hours Mystery on CBS? So yeah, it was very interesting.
Okay, let's talk about that Patrick.net post that Susann made. This photo, this topless photo.
One of her friends that we interviewed, Chris Solomini, he said that, she wasn't like an overly flirtatious person. That wasn't the purpose with which she would do this. But he said she was somebody who would stick to her word. So if she made that promise, she was not going to back down.
So in the photo, though, you notice both of Susann's hands are partially visible. It might have been taken using a self-timer, but do we have any idea who actually took this photo?
Well, the defense argued at one point that it was Mary Catherine who took the photo, right? And I'm not sure how that helps them in saying that maybe that it was like a family activity and so he wouldn't have been angry about this. Like I'm just guessing. Like I'm not sure where they were going with that. But Jack Early made it very clear to us that he did not think Scott was angered by this photo and by the chat. The question is, if it didn't bother him so much, then why did he have a screenshot of the Patrick.net chat on his phone and then a printout of that on his printer?
Welcome back. So another possible motive that investigators explored was a one-time relationship Sills had with a woman named Marie Dalton. Now, she was a former nurse that he met online while he was still married to Susann. I want to play a clip that we didn't get to put in the hour of Marie's conversation with police after Susann died.
So did he mention like he was stuck in his, loveless marriage and, it was
Kind of.
miserable?
He wasn't miserable, but he would say that he slept in his office a few times. We text. It sounds like we had a big affair, right? And we met, nothing, I promise you, nothing like that. We met once for like an hour. One time. This was all done email or text. And I think I boosted the guy's ego. That's what happened. I think I came in and, here he's been married, 10, 12 years, and she's very beautiful, very nice. He said she was a good mother, but I think he's miserable. I felt that, and because when I would say something nice, he would just like feed me more. He's like a machine. I don't know, but you have to feed compliments too.
I mean, it almost sounds a little like she feels kind of sorry for him. Like she's just not that into him, but he is in need of this ego boost.
Yeah. I also, how she starts out saying he wasn't miserable. Oh, yeah, I guess he was pretty miserable. It's interesting how she makes that turn.
She kind of makes him sound like a little bit of a narcissist, although later in the interview, I think she also admits to leading him on a little bit because she's got a thing for doctors.
2 weeks after Susann died, Dr. Sills sent Marie a letter, and I just want to read you a portion of that because it kind of illuminates this a little more. By the way, he addresses her as Ma chère Marie. Whoever I find out there, and I pray it really is you, I am confident she will be an exceptionally bright and vivacious woman, and I will be envied by all other men because I will have her. But you need to understand that in my heart, at the end of the day, that relationship will always be judged against your glow. I'm not just saying this to jack up your ego. For me, you really have set an incredibly high standard, and you probably weren't even trying. So I want the original, and then in capital letters, you.
Yeah, he's a wee bit rusty, I guess, in the wooing department, but it almost sounds like something that was like written by ChatGPT. There's something, I don't know how to explain it, like somewhat sort of oddly mechanical about it.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. He is a scientist.
Once she heard about the arrest, Marie told investigators she felt guilty and she thought that he might have killed his wife, basically to be with her.
But, we did ask Jack early about this flat out. Did he want to get Susann out of the way? And he said no. And then he actually went on to say off camera that Dr. Sills really was just looking for essentially a replacement for Susann mother-wise, that he wanted someone to help with the kids, basically, to be a mom to the kids.
Does the letter include anything about, I think you would make such a good mother?
He's very complimentary to Marie, and he actually kind of numerically lists the things that he finds so intriguing about her. And I don't remember if her maternal skills are one of them, but he definitely talks about how great she looks in a bikini and says, you know, you would really help me with my practice. You know, we would take it to another level. And he's kind of like offering her the position of business manager that Susann held. And throughout this letter, which is quite long, or email rather, he kind of reminds himself that, oh, but I've been through this tragedy. But now that I've had a chance to grieve and I'm ready to get out there again, I really want you in my life, and we don't have to sneak around now.
Just to remind everyone, this letter comes 2 weeks after his wife dies. So the jury deliberates, and the big question is not only if they're going to find him guilty, but if they will find him guilty of first degree or second degree murder. So first off, can we kind of explain what the difference is?
Sure. Basically, first degree murder is premeditated and second degree murder is not premeditated. So second degree, you didn't plan it. First degree, you did plan it. Now, in this case, the prosecution argues that no, perhaps he didn't think about this days or weeks ahead of time, but it was premeditated, they say, in the fact that when he strangled her, he did it for a long period of time. And so the amount of time that it takes to strangle someone to death and not just incapacitate them is long enough for him to say, what am I doing, and stop.
The prosecutor and also the medical experts testified that it takes 30 seconds to render someone unconscious. And then depending on how old you are, you know, your health, it could take, 3 to 5 minutes to actually strangle someone to death. And the prosecutor actually looked at her watch and said, let's all just wait for 30 seconds just to see how long 30 seconds feels like.
And so during that time that he was strangling her, he could have stopped. That was where the premeditation came in.
Mm-hmm. After about 3 hours, the jury came back with a verdict, and they find him not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second-degree murder. Were you surprised by this decision?
You know, it's interesting because we talked with the jurors quite a bit about motive, and they said that they wanted to know the why, but they also said that they didn't need the why to know that he did it. And they told us that they spent a lot of time going first degree, second degree, first degree, second degree. And the reason that they couldn't do first degree is just that they felt like he snapped and that it was not something that he planned out.
A split 30-second decision to, the prosecution's argument. The sentencing is about 3 months after the verdict. And we hear from a couple of members of Susann's family, including her daughter, Mary Catherine, who still believes in her father's innocence. And, this murder would have had to be occurring while both of his children are just upstairs sleeping, right? It takes a certain type of person to do that. Mary Catherine does not believe that her father is that type of person. Here's some of what she had to say.
I want my father to walk me down the aisle at my wedding someday. When I have a family and children, I want my father to be there to hold my baby. I have been left orphaned, and I feel so lost without my parents.
My heart was breaking for her. What I heard was a young woman just trying to hang on to anything, a wisp of the life she had before this nightmare began. And if it's just a little bit of her father, then she wants it.
Yeah, it's really unfathomable what she and her brother Eric have been through. From the age of 12, losing their mom. They've sort of lost their dad now, even though he's alive, but he's not going to be around, really. And Mary Catherine's foster mom passed away shortly before the sentencing. And she apparently is the one who found her. So just so much tragedy, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Clearly, we know where Mary Catherine stands on this, but what about her brother, her twin brother? Do we know anything about, how he feels about his dad and how he feels about what happened?
So he's out of state, whereas Mary Catherine still lives in Southern California. But both Mary Catherine and Eric were called to testify at the trial by the prosecution. He would say things like, I don't really remember, but then he would be presented with a statement that he made when he was 12. And when asked, he would say, yes, that was truthful. So, they're very much in their dad's corner.
Dr. Sills received the mandatory sentence under California law for second-degree murder, which is 15 years to life. Would his sentence be different if it had been a first-degree murder guilty verdict?
Yes, that sentence is 25 years to life in California. And he's eligible for parole, as we mentioned at the end of the hour, in 2033, which kind of seems like it's just around the corner.
Yeah, it's true. 15 years doesn't seem like much. Susann's mother, Teresa, also gave a statement at sentencing about the loss of her daughter. What was it like to listen to her talk about the kind of person her daughter was?
So I was at the sentencing, and they were sitting on separate sides of the courtroom, where the grandmother, Teresa, and Susann's stepbrother were on one side, kind of on the prosecution side. And then Mary Catherine and her other friends and family were on the defense side of the aisle. Teresa was very careful not to say anything really negative about Dr. Sills. She really focused on her daughter, Susann, and this amazing woman that she was, and the hopes that she had to see her daughter grow up and get married and all these wonderful things. And then once the sentencing was over, Mary Catherine came over and talked to her grandmother, and they reminisced a little bit. That was nice to see, because we did know that was something that was really important for Susann's mom, was to maintain the relationship, at least with her grandchildren. And she made a really poignant remark during her statement.
Oh, yeah. We mentioned this in the hour, the staircase, that, here is this staircase that Susann dreamed of seeing Mary Catherine walk down on her wedding day. And I think as moms, we all think about that. Like, I think about the staircase in my home and watching my daughter walk down for prom. And that just was so poignant that, of course, the staircase ended up playing an entirely different role.
Tracy, Gayane, this has been fantastic. The final 48 hours for the season.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
All right, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this season of Postmortem. We have one more special episode coming up next week, and then we'll be back for a new season of 48 Hours in September. But keep your eye on the 48 Hours podcast feed this summer for more classic 48 Hours episodes and perhaps a few more surprises. If you like this series, Postmortem, please rate and review 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts and follow 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also listen ad-free on the Amazon Music and Wondery app, or with a 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening.